Welcome to Ninon Speaks, and thank you for tuning in and watching because this is going to be an amazing show. I have Meyer Lansky with me, and of course, if you go back in history a little bit, some of you out there know who he was and how he was and what he did. And I have his grandson with me, which is also the same name, Meyer Lansky,
Yes,
right?
the
same
namesake.
Now, why did they why did they name you the same name?
Well, actually,
Were you the first?
no, I'm the second.
You're the second.
So, when I was born in 1957, my dad insisted, and my grandfather didn't want me to be named after him for a lot of reasons, not religious, because I know
No,
the
I was
Jews.
going to say the second as
Yeah.
of this. There was two sons, right? Paul,
Yeah.
your father had two sons.
Right, two sons.
Okay, so you got the lucky one. You were the lucky name.
I was a lucky name. But I'm the grandson.
But
My
you're the
uncle and
grandson.
my dad are, they were the sons.
They were
Yeah.
the sons, and
Right.
and of course you had a very different childhood.
Yes, I did. Like I said, my grandfather did not want me to be named after him for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
One of the biggest, he thought maybe I would have problems later in life. Kidnapping attempt, which I actually did.
I was
So
gonna
he was
say,
right
was
about
he
that.
right?
He was right. I got away. I was lucky. I was about 9 years old, but
That
I got
must
the
have
idea
been,
of
that
what
must have
what
been
he.
awfully frightening.
It was for me more. I was a kid, so
Yeah.
not as much. But it was very frightening for my grandfather. He was in Israel at the time.
Oh my goodness!
And he had, there was FBI agents on each end of my grade school watching me.
And at that
he
time,
was
where were you living at that
Tacoma,
time?
Washington. I'm from
You were
Washington
Tacoma,
State
Washington.
originally, right? I left
that-
there years ago, but
Yeah.
that's where I'm from.
And that was was it ransom money? What was it? They wanted money? Or
Yeah,
what
they wanted money. There was an article in Reader's Digest that came out around 1971 about my grandfather, and it talked about, he had $300 million, and
Did he?
yeah, I don't know.
You
Nobody
don't
ever
know.
found out. That I wouldn't say if I knew.
Yeah.
I would,
You keep that a secret
yeah,
anyway.
right.
Absolutely.
But it created that situation, the very situation he was worried about.
Well,
Yeah.
same thing happened to Frank Sinatra.
Sure, his son. I
the
remember
same
that, yeah.
same sort of thing.
Absolutely.
They go where the money is, of course.
And in those days, that was, kidnapping was a little more popular than
it
is
was.
probably
Well,
today.
why is it not so
I don't know
popular
why
now?
popular,
People have
but-
more money now. Actually,
That's true, they do. But they have more protection.
more protection.
And you've got a lot more,
a lot more protection
yeah,
out there.
internet services.
Your grandfather, a little bit about your grandfather. Going back, what memories do you kind of have that stick out that you kind of looked at it in a different way?
Well, growing up on the West Coast, in the Northwest particularly, on my mom's side of the family, they were just normal people, basically.
Yeah.
And my grandfather, being on the East Coast, would, early on would come out to visit and things. And I noticed a huge cultural difference, the way he dressed,
Really?
the fastidiousness of his, just
Was he more casual?
Yeah, he wasn't as casual. He was very
dressed
together,
up,
very
very
dressed up.
together.
So he would comment, he would show me little things and at a young age on how to hang my pants without creasing them and things.
So he taught you
Yeah.
more how to dress and how to be in society.
Exactly. Yeah,
Rather
how to
than
present yourself.
Did he ever talk to you about what he was doing and how he was doing it or anything like that? Never.
No, I never could talk to him about his background.
No,
or
you said
anything
you
like
never
that.
could. Does that mean you weren't allowed to?
Well, I wasn't. I could have, but I never. I brought up a couple things as I was getting older, and I'm sure he knew a day in my teens I would figure out who he was. Right? I didn't know that at 12.
So you
years
didn't know who he
No,
was?
I didn't have any idea until about 12 years old. And then there was a big news night with Walter Cronkite, and my grandfather was leaving Israel, and it showed a little map, and it went on for 3 nights. And he says, Meyer Lansky tried to get off in Venezuela tonight, and they put him back on the plane.
Of course, no way was he going to get off there
No,
because
they
he's not
weren't
going to tell
gonna- yeah,
anybody where he's going to
Israel
get off
actually
anyway.
sent Interpol after him after not giving him citizenship, which he should have gotten, the right
Now,
of return.
citizenship, which means where did he came from? Israel?
He went to Israel
He went
he
to
wanted
Israel.
citizenship, and he had the right to do it. He had the right of return rights
No,
like anybody else.
No,
so.
your grandfather was Jewish, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah, so they did it
Which is a little different
right.
because mostly the Italians.
No,
at
the
that
Italians
time-
didn't go to Israel. With
no,
the Jews.
I'm saying mostly, for what they were doing, was
right.
mostly Italians.
Well, let me tell you how it all began. So,
How did it begin?
So we're looking at prior to Prohibition, about 1918, 1919. You were in his teens.
Yes.
And, it was strictly Italian at that time. And
Yeah.
even more so, they were Sicilian. They didn't even want other
parts
factions of
of
Italians, right?
Italy involved.
So my grandfather was, he had the Jewish gangs, he had the Irish, and then he had the Italians. They all were in a real
So he
small
had them
area.
all.
Yeah, and he was walking home one night, and some Italians jumped out, and Luciano was the gang leader at the time, and he said, "We want your money if you want to cross over to go through the Italian section of town to get to the Jewish section of town." And mostly,
wow.
they didn't have any problem with Jewish kids. They just give up the money or they'd run or something. But
Well,
my
they
grandfather,
were just after the money, right?
yeah,
Probably.
they were after
Yeah,
the money.
yeah.
My grandfather said, "No, I'm not going to give you any money," and he was ready to fight all 4 or 5 kids that were there that day. And Luciano and he had a real moment where they respected each other.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
wasn't there one time through their
Yeah,
life
and
that they respected each other?
They respected
Didn't they at
him.
one time think that your
Just a
grandfather
one-time
actually...
thing. And if that didn't happen, they never would have, integrated. That was that
But
moment
didn't they
that
think at
changed.
one time that your grandfather actually was the one that killed Luciano? Or
Did they what?
That he shot him?
No, not Luciano.
No, because they were good, but it was written up in some of the papers that they thought that he was behind it, and I'm thinking...
You're thinking of
no.
Bugsy Siegel, I think.
Oh, Bugsy
yeah,
Siegel.
that's a big difference, yeah.
Well,
No,
Bugsy Siegel got shot in Beverly Hills,
yes,
right?
he got
Yeah.
shot in Beverly Hills, yeah. They blamed that on my grandfather. He never had anything to do with it.
that, no.
No, I mean...
But your grandfather wasn't like that anyway, was
No,
he?
he wasn't
No.
like that at all. The violence was the last thing he ever wanted, They
Yeah.
had it, they needed it.
Yes.
But it was always a last resort with him personally.
Yeah.
That he,
How many was it kind of in his team? How many people were there with
the
him?
initial team, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You had Frank Costello, Bugsy Siegel, Lucky Luciano, and who would be and him. So maybe 5. 4 including him. The initial.
And were they all in different
right?
places, or were they always together, or how?
They were always together in New York City growing
Always in
up,
New York
and then
City.
they worked for. Like anybody else, you had them working for the 2 mob bosses that were there from Sicily.
Yeah.
And they were in their 30s and 40s. Now, they were only in their teens. So when Prohibition hit 1920, they were running liquor for those 2 men, Maranzano and Masseria. Now, right after Prohibition, 1933, they got rid of those 2 guys, and they took over.
And then
they
took
eliminated
over.
them. Yeah, my grandfather, Lucky Luciano, and all
How
got
old
together.
were you? Well, you weren't even born
No, I
yet.
wasn't
No,
even
you
born.
weren't
Yeah,
even
no,
around yet.
no,
So
no.
you didn't. But you've learned all this going on,
Sure.
and the history, because you kind of represent the family name.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's I've learned a lot of it. My dad, he's 91 years old, he's still around, and he was there for everything. My uncle was there for everything. So I've gotten all that information from them over the years.
And your father, how involved was your father?
Oh, he wasn't involved.
He
at
wasn't
all.
involved.
No, he went to West Point, and then he went out west, and that's why we lived in Tacoma. He was a civil engineer.
A civil
so
engineer.
yeah, he had nothing to do with any
And
of that.
that's probably what your grandfather probably wanted for his
Oh,
2
sure.
sons.
Yeah.
He had 2 sons.
2
and-
sons. One had cerebral palsy, so he was kind of compromised,
Of
as far
course.
as physically. So he just worked and stayed at home.
And then your father.
Yeah, my dad was the one that was the pillar of success.
The pillar
for him.
of success.
Yeah.
So, do you believe, or do you know, that your grandfather was very proud of his 2 sons?
Yes.
I mean, he kind of got them not into what he was doing, but into something else that, that maybe he wanted to be at one time. Who knows? We don't know,
No.
I mean, do you think that when you said that he was crossing from one line to go to another line, and they were coming after him, and he had to pay them, do you think if that hadn't happened, he wouldn't have gone into the business he went into, or do you think it was a taste?
It would have been a totally different. Yeah, if they didn't connect, it
I was
wouldn't
going
have
to
been
say, if
what
they
it was
didn't
today.
connect,
That
sometimes
one moment was
that one
what made
moment.
history,
Sometimes
right?
you don't realize that there's a moment in
comes
your
down to a
life.
moment,
it comes down to a moment that you kind of sort of think, well, if I do this or I do that, and he had to make his mind up very fast, and then he went into the business of what
just
it.
fate, the way that it worked, So that's,
Now, how is the mafia now? How is it sort of perceived? Because there's so many different ones now.
Well, there's only one. The real Italian mob. They're still in New York. They still do what they do. They're nothing like they were.
No,
that I know. But you never hear about them. That's
what I'm saying.
That's a good thing because when you had guys out there in the 70s and they were hanging out on the street. That's not what they did, especially the original guys. They didn't want their name in the paper.
Well, I don't think any of them want their name in the paper.
They didn't want their pictures.
No, you're getting your name in the paper, and we're going to go into the Mob Museum, which is something out here. Now you're not actually in it, but you do help them down
Right.
there?
I gave some, donated some things to them. I take people through when they want to go from all over the world. I've been doing that for 5-6 years. I don't work for them directly, no. And it's a prop. It's an avenue to take people to explain what.
What's the most common question that, you meet all these people? What's the most common question people ask you about your grandfather?
Oh, him particularly. The money, and did he have Ben Siegel murdered? I said no, each one. Each one.
He didn't.
That's all Hollywood. Yeah,
and it's all Hollywood.
Yeah,
the papers are the papers, aren't they? They are what they are. You can't.
And then they ask about the movies a lot that have been out there for years now. Recently, Harvey Keitel portrayed my grandfather in a movie called Lansky on
Lansky, okay.
on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
And he did a really great job. The rest of the movie, you have a lot of artistic license in these movies, and I get used to it because I've been watching these since The Godfather 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And but Harvey did a good job. Well, he's Jewish and he's older, and he knew that background, so that's.
Do you like that coming out, or does it bother you kind of, because this is your family, this is your grandfather, and they're portraying something that's kind of years ago, it's not happening now. I mean, it's, in your family.
The thing I was going to tell you that people ask the most, are those movies real or are they all made up? And I say, you'd be surprisingly, there's a lot of fact in a lot of those movies. They're not all made up.
Well, I think they have to be, though, don't they?
Well, because, they do the parts where they're having him kill somebody, or that. He never did that. That's totally just artistic license.
It's nice to hear that's coming from you, because you're part of the family. This was your grandfather, and you can testify that no, he didn't do any of that.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. If you've ever watched the movie Bugsy with Warren Beatty, it was out quite a few years ago, but he portrayed Warren Beatty, and there was a part where he did a screen test.
Yeah.
And everybody said, "Oh, that's just that's just fill in and stuff. That never happened, right?" I said, "No, that actually did happen." Because my dad drove out to Las Vegas in 1946 with my grandfather and another guy named Dan Stromberg. He was a mobster from Philadelphia. And when they got to the Flamingo Hotel, my dad was standing there, and my grandfather and Ben said, "Hey, I came out to see George Raft, which was a childhood friend. He's going to give me a screen test." And my grandfather had to talk. He said, "No, you can't do that, Ben. We can't do that type of thing. You can't have that kind of publicity."
Publicity, yeah.
So in the movie they have that, and people said that was all fake, right? I said, no, that's actually happened, because my dad was standing there listening
to this,
and he was 14.
So don't you feel kind of great that you can turn around and say, yes, it did happen, no, it didn't happen?
Yes, that's
and
crazy.
Because this is, I hate to say coming from the horse's mouth, but it's coming from your mouth, part of the family, and a very close to the family, because that's your grandfather. So you can tell. Do a lot of things come out that aren't true? I mean,
well, the murder, he had nothing to do with that, and what else? The money. He lost a lot of money. He, after Cuba, he lost a ton of money because when Castro came over,
I heard that he lost.
And other people did too. It wasn't just him invested in the hotel. He built it and created it, but he also had 25 years of life that he had to, lawyer up all the time. So he was constantly giving money out to lawyers and
to shut them up,
attorneys, right? Well, no, to help them, to help him, because
the
FBI was always trying to
shut the
IRS. They're
always after him.
Always after him. So he constantly had to, and he gave away money. One of his letters, I've got 450 letters that my dad gave me of his.
Oh my!
And I'm going to use them for the book that I have coming out in the next year and a half.
So how far ahead are you with the book?
Well, we're just getting started with the proposal and all, so it'll be a while. But the one thing I will say is some of the letters he talks about. People ask me why I didn't save money, and I said I didn't believe that money was to be saved. It was to be used,
spent and to be used,
taking care of people, help people. He was a great philanthropist.
I was going to say he did an awful lot of helping other people.
Yes, he did,
and that was kind of his composer. That's what he was.
Exactly.
That's how he was, and people don't know that.
No.
So there's a lot of anything out there you'd like to let people know. The other side of him, not always in the mafia.
Well, he was he was never into drugs. There's been people that have said that, and
so
I knew his character. I wasn't there for everything he did, but I certainly know his character for 26 years.
I would think so.
He wasn't involved in drugs. He went to they had 31 casinos in Florida back in the 1940s, about the time that Ben
31
opened up.
casinos in
Yeah,
Florida.
smaller ones.
I didn't even know they had gambling in Florida.
Well, it wasn't legal. But here's the
see?
benefit of it. Those little towns in those days, 1945, they were, they needed money. Those people that lived
Well,
there.
the little towns to
very
keep
small.
it going.
Yeah, and they had one sheriff, and they were happy he came
And so
to town.
this is where he gave his money away,
Right.
was to the towns.
Well,
and
here's
to
what he
help the
did.
people.
There wasn't I'm sorry.
That's okay.
There wasn't a gaming commission at the time. He was the gaming
he was-
commission
he
in that
was the
area,
gaming
right?
commission,
So
yeah.
he wouldn't let people in that were couldn't afford to gamble. He paid some households in the area all the time. Don't come in, and here you get $25 a week or so, which is a lot of money back
Yes,
then.
and then?
He gave them great money for their produce, and because he had restaurants and he had everything in these casinos
Of course.
that were housed in all different types of buildings. One was an old barracks, and there was one called the Colonial Inn that he purchased from Barbara Walters' dad, and he turned it
Yes.
into a really flamboyant, beautiful casino. And it had a nice
So
restaurant.
he
nice
kind of
decor.
had this flair.
Right, and he took care of the local people. He gave money to all the local, people
Keep
that
them
needed
going,
money.
that
keep
needed
them
money
going,
for
yeah.
their family and their children and everybody.
Yeah, he was never personally out. There was guys, of course, that were that sell drugs, and that wasn't a big deal in that day, but as much as it is today.
It is today.
But then they would, and then they'd accuse him sometimes of, did you scam people, for older people for money? He said,
So
no,
he would
was
never,
into
he
that type of
never
thing.
did that.
He was
It's
always
nice
out
to
to
clear,
help people. Yeah.
it's so nice to clear that up, just to know, especially
Sure,
from you that
yeah.
should know. And we've talked a lot about his life. Now, what about your life? Now, what are you doing? You have a place in the Caesar's Palace or something?
We have a restaurant in the Flamingo Hotel called Bugsy and Myers. It's been open about 2.5, 3 years now.
Yes.
And
how's that doing?
It's doing pretty well. It's you're right there on site where all this history took place, and it's all decorated beautifully in the 1940s.
Are you there
decoration.
sometimes?
And I'm in and out of there
You're in
doing
and out.
different
Do you
things.
talk to the people, the
Oh,
tourists
sure.
that come in?
Tourists that come in.
And are they excited to see you and meet you?
And now they're going to have the pleasure of being able to get married in the count room.
Oh yeah, I want to hear about this. You said you're going to have a mobster wedding.
Right. Well,
chapel,
first
or
let me give you an
What
experience
is this?
I had years ago at there when the Hilton owned it back in '93 and '94. I was living here in Las Vegas, and they were going to take down Ben Siegel's and Virginia Hill's suite, which was above the wedding chapel. It was 2 stories.
Yeah.
And we did a little local TV show, news thing with this at the time, and I got to go in it and see it. And they used to use it for high rollers. The Hilton did, and why they took it down, I have no idea. That was, what a piece of history that was.
I remember that.
So I'm sitting in there, and they're interviewing me, and he's got the bar in there, and he's got a lead wall. And you go downstairs, and they took me to the bedroom, which they actually it was all that beautiful green tile with the back in the mid-century.
Yeah.
And in the closet, he had a ladder, and that went down, and it went to 2 exits to where Ben could get out. He was always aware he had to be careful.
So they actually did have those things.
It was actually there. I got to go through it.
They actually had
it
those
was something
stairways,
else.
and that you could go left or right,
Right.
or whichever direction.
If he needed to get away, he had
real
to go
fast, and that he was able to get away. And
Sure. Yeah, he got out if he needed to.
Absolutely.
So, getting back to the wedding thing. So about 2 years ago, I met a couple here in town named Heidi and Joe Marino from New York.
Okay.
And they had a business called Vegas Mob Weddings, the only gig in town in that background. Of course, you got Elvis in that too.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
They're the only ones. So I talked to them. We got together on social media, and we got together, and he said, hey, what we could do is put a special little package for you, the real deal or something to that degree.
And it's the Flamingo, right?
Yeah. So what we're gonna do? Hopefully, we do weddings. I've done a couple so far as an officiant, and I was a little nervous because I didn't.
Can you do weddings? Are you allowed to?
Yeah, I got an officiant's license just to do it, and the reason I did it,
how great!
People love that, and we drive around. They drive around town, and they do them without me too, with that beautiful green. 1939, and people are honking, and they got the pinstripe suits and the whole, you got a.
So this
a
is
fake,
very excitable for you. Look how excited! Look how excited he is. I mean, and
it just broadens what I do.
Of course.
And now it's all about the history because a lot of it's gone now, and soon to be even more.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's kind of died out and everything else. So you're getting a lot of attraction.
Right. People want to stay in the moment of that time, and if you go into the speakeasy and you have a couple drinks and it's all decorated back in the 1920s. You're back in the moment. You get an idea what that was like.
You know,
I
got
love
married at the in the
I
Mob
got married.
Street.
Well, that's great. I'm excited about
I think that
part, yeah.
it's already started, or are
Well,
you still
I'm starting
putting
with
it
them, but
together?
now we're working with to get it even bigger and go into the count room back there, and that would be incredible. To just do it on the property.
To do it on the property.
Yeah, that would be big. So we have to have
I think that's
approval
really,
for that,
really
so-
big. Oh, you have to get approval.
Yeah, well,
for
yeah,
all
it's
that?
corporate. So I mean, even though the
Oh,
rest,
yeah,
we have to
yeah.
talk to them. So
I'm quite sure they wouldn't say no.
oh, God, I can hardly. I hope so.
Oh, look how
I'm
excited
excited
he is.
about that, man.
Gonna get married,
I
can
love
marry
it.
all these people out
Yeah.
there. I think that's
It's great,
amazing.
yeah.
The younger generation, so far, do they ask you many questions about? Because we're going back, as you said, to the early 1900s.
Right, I know it.
So
Well,
it's-
with all the movies and books and everything that are out
Yeah.
there all these years,
Yeah.
yes. So the first wedding I did was a couple that actually got married a year before. They drove out from Minnesota, of all places. They were only in their 30s, and they found out that I was going to be a part of their with the special package, and they came all the way out. And there was probably, I don't know, 10 people all together, and they were like 30 years old. They knew everything.
They knew
I was so
everything.
surprised.
They
I
researched
I
it.
said, "You guys, I don't have to tell you either. You already
Yeah,
know
you know
about
what's
this
going
stuff."
on already. I
But
love
they
it.
really enjoyed it. They were all in theme with the pinstripe suits and the hats, and I've got pictures of them, and it just went great.
So this
you know.
is your grandfather would probably love this.
Oh, it would be great. Yeah, I like
He would
keeping it
have loved
alive,
it.
and people like knowing about it, and it's. With the museum, you see there's millions of people have come through there now from all over
that's
the
a very
world.
popular place for people to go.
And before
down
that,
and
you
see.
really didn't have other than books, and this is hands-on now. You can actually see how
Absolutely.
things.
And then
work.
also and you definitely, the difference in Vegas now,
Oh, I hear
and
that one a lot
all
too.
the time,
Yeah.
and then when we had, I'm going to say the mob running it, that
Right.
may be the wrong phrase,
Yeah.
but is that a right phrase to use? Because they
Yeah,
kind
no,
of,
it's fine. And they originally had their blueprint was you just come here and everything's comped and there's no red tape and you play quarter, you get drinks, you get food, you get
And that's what
they
it-
just want you to drink. They didn't care about the rooms and the
well,
money.
because
and
I mean, if you drink enough, you're going to gamble enough, aren't
right,
you?
or you're going to come back.
Or you're going to come back and
stay.
you're going to
Yeah,
enjoy.
right.
Because those days it was very, you had the Keely Smith, the Louis Primas, you had all these people, even going back even further than that.
Sure.
You
Rat
had all
Pack,
these, the
everything.
Rat Pack, all
You
these.
still have Wayne Newton. He's around, so that's
Yeah,
always-
he's still around. At least we
still
got
here,
somebody,
right.
and you.
Yeah,
we have
that's
them
great.
and you.
Actually, is where he is right next to the Bugsy and Myers. He's right across from us.
Yeah, I understand he's got a new room. He's
Yeah, he's got a new
performing.
room right there. So
I've got to
that's
come down. I've got to
wonderful.
come
Yeah.
down and see him. Have you seen his show yet?
I saw it at the last minute. I haven't
Yeah,
seen the full show.
the full
but
show.
one day I just went over and met him because he's one of the last. I mean, he was even young when they were around, but who else
what
is
was
here?
He? How old?
Nobody.
He 14, 12 years old.
No,
maybe?
he was probably 20. He was still singing at
At that time.
age.
Yeah,
when
because
Frank
he started
and all-
very young anyway.
Very young.
Vegas.
Yeah, he's younger than them. But,
yeah, he's he did not relate back to the mob, did he?
He worked here when they were here.
He
Sure.
worked here,
Yeah,
he was part of
working around them,
with Frank
around them
Sinatra
anyway.
and all those.
Well, they had the casinos and the hotels, and they made a lot of those guys in New York before they even came out to the West Coast.
to the West Coast.
Frank Sinatra, and they employed them.
Did you obviously got to meet all those people?
Not Frank. I got to meet a few of the original guys that were around. Yeah, when I go back to
The
Florida.
originals,
Yeah.
the original mobs, right?
Yeah, really. So.
So, but you're living an exciting life now. Do you think with your grandfather this has affected your life as to where you've gone and what you've done to keep yourself as what you do, because you didn't go into the mob? So
Right.
you have to try to convince people. Do you have to do that, or do you?
No, because
No?
it was a one-generational thing with the Jews. It's just a one-time thing.
A one-time
Now, there is
thing.
Jews that went on into the fort.
Well, you're Jewish.
Yeah, so I mean, but that were in the mob. But basically, in my grandfather's era, my dad was educated, went to West Point, and he had no connection to that, and that was it.
No.
It was just a one-generational thing.
So
Yeah. They didn't want their kids involved because, originally it was Italian. Now the Italians
Yeah,
are a little
of
different.
course.
They
well,
still do
Well, they're
what they
still
do,
involved. They've still got
but not the
things running
Jews.
around, but
It
it's
was a one-time
but it's
thing.
nothing
Yeah.
like it used to be.
Oh,
But
no,
it is still
no.
going.
It's still going.
It's still going. If you had anything to change in your life, what would you change?
Change? You mean as far as talking about
Life,
grandfather?
anything. Life. Your grandfather? You
Yeah,
can say
I
that?
probably would have done a lot more with the hotel business than I did. I kind of.
Do you think you would have gone into it more with your grandfather? Oh,
Well, it was. I was. He
You were
was at the,
young.
he was at the tail end of that before when I was of age.
yeah, because it was your
yeah.
father that was more involved.
My
in
dad was
that,
an engineer. He came all the way out west to the Northwest.
And he never
really,
wanted to be
No, he had no
involved.
connection to that.
Was
really,
he
no.
ever attacked or ever sort of, I mean, was it hard for him to?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
When he was working for the government,
He had
one
to clean
time
his
they came
name.
in. Yeah, he had to watch his name. And
Watch
one
his-
time they came in. My parents divorced in '72 in Washington State, and about 6 months after they divorced, these two guys came to our door and they had dark tans. They looked like they were from Florida. And my mom's a little nervous, and she says, "We're with the FBI," and she said, "Can you show us your card?" He said, "Certainly." He said, "We're here today to ask you a question. Your husband, I know you guys are separated now, and he came up here with one of the Bonanno families and wants to open a horse track, and they were going to purchase a bank." And my mom said, "I have no idea. It doesn't sound like my ex-husband's character whatsoever." And, they, asked us a few questions and left, and that was about
So
it.
they attacked the wife, the woman.
Yeah, they
hoping,
were asking.
hoping
if
she would
they
say
knew
something or do
She
something.
didn't know anything about it.
I was going to
so,
say she probably didn't know anyway. How was your mum? Was she?
She was pretty feisty lady. I mean, to be married to my dad, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
she passed away in '84, about 12 years ago. But she was curious. She was a little nervous because we didn't know who they were really until they
Of
pulled
course
their
not.
badges
And,
out. And
yes, of course. Well,
decided
a
not to
woman
say
anyway
too
would be
much.
nervous. What
Yeah.
about your grandmother? You don't mention her.
I don't. I wasn't really around her a lot.
Yeah.
My grandfather was married twice. The second wife longer than my original grandmother. She had, some medical issues early on, so I didn't really get to be around her a lot. Plus, she lived in New York City, and I lived in Washington.
So in a whole, your whole life has been rather exciting.
Yeah,
And
different
it
for sure.
still is now.
It is. I love
Because-
doing what I do.
Well, now you're
Yeah.
creating, this mobster wedding.
Right.
So anybody out there that wants to get, married in the mobster avenue,
Right.
what?
Vegas Mob Weddings is what's
All right,
called. And I'll give you
Vegas?
my brand new website that just went up.
And what is it?
It's MeyerLanskyTM.com. And we've got all that
MeyerLanskyTM.com.
trademark.com, right?
Absolutely, and you're very excited about that.
Yes, I am.
Now you
I'm
know
very
what you
excited.
could do.
Yes.
You and your wife could get married again in
Yeah.
the mobster wedding. Which
A renewal.
your
there you
renewal.
go.
I met
There
his
you
wife.
go.
She's absolutely adorable. She's absolutely. Would she do that?
Oh, I'm
You
sure
could-
she would. Yeah.
Get married. in
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah.
A mobster wedding. I think is absolutely amazing.
It's going to be a full circle now. We've got the weddings, we got the restaurant, we got the mummies, everything.
You've got everything,
All
and
entails.
that's all.
Neon Museum, that's all part of it.
And that's
Yeah.
all in the Flamingo.
That's all just, it just broadens everything.
It broadens
And you
everything.
got Oscar Goodman. He's the one that created the Mob Museum, so
Yeah.
that's his legacy for
Is
sure.
that his legacy?
Oh,
that
yeah,
he,
I think definitely,
probably,
yeah, that was
absolutely. Well, I'm quite
incredible
sure he
voice.
could tell a few stories.
Oh, sure. Yeah, he was around a
I
lot.
bet he could.
Yeah.
What's the story out there that you really wouldn't like out there that could be cleared up, or that you think it was actually put out there in the wrong way?
In the wrong way. Well, the Ben Siegel,
Ben Siegel one, yeah, you mentioned that a couple of
yeah,
times.
that's just not. That was his best friend, And,
Well, I
and
know
plus,
that.
there's a lot of. You have to have, you just don't kill somebody. Like, it's not that easy. They have to really set things up. Now, you remember Albert Anastasia got killed in the chair, right?
Yes.
So what happened there was he actually killed a civilian, which in those days especially he didn't do those things.
Yeah, that was
Right.
against
There was a
the
guy
rules.
named Willie Sutton who was a independent gangster that somebody in New York City, there was a guy that owned a candy store, and he was on TV. He says, I saw him come in, and he was kind of ratted him out, right? So
Yeah.
here's Albert Anastasia watching TV one night, and he says, I hate rats. That's exactly what he said. He had the guy murdered for
Oh, so
outing
he
Willie Sutton.
rats mean he
Yeah,
hated
and
somebody
and
talking or
eventually,
whatever they
yeah,
were doing.
That was just you couldn't do that in that.
He was
time
a
period,
rat
yeah.
fink, huh?
So they had to eliminate Albert Anastasia. Now for that reason. Now Ben Siegel, you have a guy that borrowed money from his friends.
Yeah.
That started making money back with that. The
So
Flamingo
borrowed
didn't
money.
make it as fast as they wanted, but it was coming back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what would be the purpose they want to kill him for? That just doesn't make sense.
No, it was also his best friend too. So
Yeah,
he
also
was,
his best friend. Yeah, and you have...
and he wasn't known for anything like that
nothing
anyway.
like that. That's just a myth, you know.
So we've cleared that up.
I will clear that up in my book coming out. I can't tell you now, but I do know my dad and I, he's 91, so he doesn't really...
Does he
He's
still
let
know
me in
much?
on who he thinks actually.
Yeah, because your father grew up with your grandfather.
Yeah, he was right there
for
for
the
a
first
while.
probably 18 years of his life.
Sure.
So he couldn't be anywhere else. He's at home. I mean,
he knew Ben Siegel. I mean, they lived in Central Park East, and he had 2 daughters, and he'd go there for birthday parties, and they were
of course, well, like family, like
kids.
a
family.
normal family.
Ben was a very one thing about Ben Siegel, he was in incredible shape, and he's like they were like athletes, you know.
Yeah.
And he was a real family guy too. Nice guy. I mean, you never knew the other side to those people because they never.
They always say that. It's funny because you always get the message that mobsters are great family people.
Yes.
And they treat their families and their children and grandchildren, everybody very
Totally,
well.
yes,
Totally.
yes.
They like to, or they did, keep them out of everything.
Sure.
Because they didn't want them to follow in the same steps as they were in, because they basically didn't. I don't know about your grandfather, though, because he was a kind man.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you don't want to follow the footsteps. But, some people just love the excitement and what's going on and what it is, because it's an exciting life.
Yeah, it's in some ways, I suppose.
In some ways.
Stage, you got to be made for that type of life.
Yes, you have to be
you
a
can't
person.
just get into
No,
it.
you can't. And you were one of them that didn't get into it.
No, I would never.
What would you like to say to the younger generation that are growing up in this day and age, guidance to where they should guide themselves or go, like you did, because you went into something different?
Well, do the right thing, service, be honest with people. As my grandfather used to tell me that all the time.
Yeah.
People that have integrity, the ones that go the farthest,
Yeah. See, integrity.
Yeah,
If integrity
right,
go the
right,
furthest and farthest. Right.
Today's, I can't. It's hard to relate anything to what happened back in the turn of the century.
But that was then.
Yeah,
but that's also we're going back to your grandfather, not even your father. Because your father wasn't even in there. So you're going back. We're going back a few generations. So it's sort of a little bit different. The name of your place at the Flamingo again?
Bugsy and Meyer Steakhouse.
Bugsy and Meyer Steakhouse.
Right.
Absolutely amazing. You have been absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming on Ninon Speaks. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much.
interviewing you.
It's
And
great to be here.
all the best. Maybe if I get married again, guess where I'm going to get
Yes.
married?
Remember, Vegas mob weddings and
Vegas
Meyer
Mob Wedding
Lansky.
is where I'm going to get married. So we're going to find me a husband
Yes,
now.
there you go.
I'm going to find someone to marry. Anyway, thank you for watching Ninon Speaks, and thank you for coming on my show. And take care, and we'll be out with our next show.
Okay.
Take care.